Okay, so today I want to go over some problems that occur with photosynthesis and how plants sort of get around that problem and sort of like other ways to do photosynthesis other than like the normal way. All right, so first, we talked about the fact that plants have these stomatas that allow oxygen and carbon dioxide to be exchanged with the air. And that, what can happen then when those pores are open on a plant, that water content can be lost. So if there's a higher concentration of water inside the plant than outside, water content can be lost from the plant and it can wilt and lose a lot of water. So especially in like hot, dry areas, this becomes a problem because again, the water content is higher in the plant than it is outside, and water will diffuse out, right? And so, and that could be a problem because the plant loses water. So a lot of times plants will guard against that. They can then, like if the sun is beating down on the top of the leaf, they can then put a lot of their stomata underneath the leaf, all right? So like you might have a lot of stomata on the underside of the leaf. If it's not a big deal, if they live in a cool, shady environment, then there might be stomata on both sides of the leaf to try to get that exchange of gas going on. But the plants will definitely have different amounts of stomata, either on the upper leaf or the underleaf, depending on where they live. All right, so that's important to know too. We can change where the stomata are to help with that exchange of gas and to get more, of that exchange going on. So when they're in hot, dry environments, this becomes a problem because they're losing a lot of water. So the answer to that is, okay, well, we'll just close the stomata. But now you can see that that's a problem because then they're not being able to get the carbon dioxide in for the Calvin cycle. And then once they release oxygen, they can't get rid of that oxygen out of the stomata because the stomata are closed. So this becomes a problem in plants that live in sort of hot, dry environments, that they'll have to close the stomata in order to conserve water. But then they're not getting carbon dioxide in, so you have the CO2 is depleted for that step of the Calvin cycle where we need carbon dioxide. And then we can't get oxygen out, so oxygen builds up. Remember, the oxygen is produced in the light reactions. So that becomes a problem. I need to close the stomata so that I don't lose too much water, but when I do, I can't get carbon dioxide in and I can't let oxygen out, and that becomes a problem. So how do they balance those two issues? Well, there's two types of plants that live in these hot, dry environments that tend to balance these issues. All right, so to prevent this from having the stomatas to close a lot, what they will do is one of them will break apart the Calvin cycle basically into two parts. One part to get the carbon dioxide in when it's needed, when the stomata are open, and then close it so we don't lose a whole lot of water, but still then be able to undergo the other parts, the other steps. All right, so those are called C4 plants. They separate that carbon dioxide, it's called carbon dioxide fixation, that carbon fixation, getting that carbon dioxide in. They break it down into two steps, and they're in two different cells. All right, so that's a C4 plant. Will have that step occur in two different cells. All right, so that way they can get carbon dioxide in, and that part can happen in the one cell. Then they can close the stomata and then go over the second part, right? And sort of finish the Calvin cycle with that second part, even though stomata are closed. All right, so some examples of this are sugarcane, corn, and a lot of grasses. All right, think about grasslands. It's very hot, it's very dry. The sun is beating down on them at all times, so they need to close those stomata to prevent too much water loss. But they can do that then and then still go through the rest of the Calvin cycle. Okay, so that's one type of plant called a C4 plant. Sugarcane, corn, grasses is one kind of C4 plant. And the other ones are cactus. And cacti are called cam plants. And this takes that Calvin cycle part and it separates it into two times of the day. So it can do the one part maybe at night when the stomata can be open because it's not as hot, all right? So we can open the stomata, get as much carbon dioxide in as possible, all right? And then We can close them during the day when it's really hot, and we can go through the rest of it. So it's sort of like a night and day type thing, different times of the day. So it separates that Calvin cycle into two parts. One part they can do at night when the stomata are open. One part they can do during the day when the stomata are closed. All right, and those are called cam plants, and this cactus. All right, and pineapples are another good example of cam plants. What these both have in common is the ability to separate that Calvin cycle into two steps. And one of the differences here is that they use, so remember Rubisco was a 5-carbon compound. So I'm going to go back here just to remind you what that looks like. Oh, there it is. All right, so remember this is a 5-carbon compound that's found in the stroma here, and it gets added to carbon dioxide. So that was called Rubisco, all right? I don't remember if I gave you that or not, but just in case, there it is. That's called Rubisco, all right? So that's a 5-carbon compound. In both of these plants, this is why this is called a C4 plant, they use a 4-carbon compound instead of Rubisco to add to carbon dioxide. So I think it's because of this separating it. For some reason, they can't use a 5-carbon compound. You don't have to know the details of it. I don't even know the details of it. But they use a C4, a 4-carbon compound to add to carbon dioxide instead of a 5-carbon compound like normal Rubisco and like normal photosynthesis. Okay? So those are just some other ways to do photosynthesis when we have to concentrate on when to open the stomata and when to have it closed. Okay, so this is one of the things you're going to add to your foldable are other ways to do photosynthesis. All right, and so this loss of water that they're trying to prevent is called transpiration. I don't know if you can read that in there, but that's called transpiration, is the movement of water through a plant. So it comes up through the roots and then it'll go out those stomata, those pores. All right, and if that happens too much, the plant is going to lose a lot of water and wilt. All right, so different things can increase transpiration rates, especially if it's hot and dry. If it's very windy, that can actually increase transpiration rate too. All right, so then we might need to close the stomata. Okay, and then they can do that at different times of the day and in different types of cells. Okay, so that's other ways to undergo photosynthesis.